I flew home for the holidays. The lights were off, just Grandma alone with a sandwich. A note on the fridge said, "Used your savings for Tobias. Watch her this week. Enjoying Arizona, Mom." I stood there for what felt like forever. The kitchen was dim and cold, her tiny frame hunched at the table, struggling with a slice of dry bread and shredded lettuce. I hadn't even dropped my suitcase yet, and already everything felt wrong. I hadn't told them I was coming. I thought I'd surprise them. Instead, I was the one who got ambushed. That note, the tone of it so casual, so transactional. As if my $17, 500-inch career savings was some shared household petty cash fund, and my elderly grandmother's care was just a bullet point on their vacation checklist. My hands were shaking. Hers were too. But for a different reason. She didn't seem surprised to see me, only relieved. "They're off in Sedona," she said softly, her voice flat, like she was reading a weather report. Said I'd be fine on my own. But then they left that note. And now, I guess, I'm not. That was how I returned home after nearly 2 years away. My name is Tila Dunn. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a physician assistant in emergency medicine at a downtown hospital in Seattle. My job is high pressure. My hours are chaotic. And my patients are mostly strangers who expect me to save their lives while barely remembering my name. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And it took me everything I had to get there. Night shifts, weekend rotations, student loans, unpaid externships. Every cent I could save. I did. I wasn't trying to be rich. I was trying to specialize, take advanced trauma certification courses, maybe pivot to disaster medicine or pediatric care. I didn't even touch the account. I just built it, brick by brick, overtime by overtime. And now, it was empty. I first noticed something was off when my debit card declined at a gas station just an hour outside Baton Rouge. I assumed it was a fraud block or an app glitch. I had other cards. I didn't think much of it. But now I knew the truth. My mother had kept joint access to that account since I was 17. I never removed her. It felt unnecessary. She never touched it before. Or so I thought. Grandma June reached for my hand. Her fingers were icy, but still delicate. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said, her voice full of years. I would have made something, but the stovetop's acting funny again. I opened the fridge. Processed cheese, a half carton of expired eggs, a bruised apple, and not much else. No prepared meals. No medication organizer. Just that note, curling at the corners from condensation. I don't know what cracked more in that moment, my heart or my illusions. I'd always known my mom could be difficult. A narcissist with a polished smile. She loved appearances more than relationships. But I never thought she'd cross this line. Victor, my stepdad, was her shadow. Whatever she said, he seconded. Whatever she did, he explained away. And Tobias, my younger half-cousin, raised like her golden boy, was a walking disaster. In and out of schools, in and out of parties, in and out of trouble. They'd always said he was sensitive, just like his late father. But I saw the pattern. The tantrums, the bailouts, the deflection, and now, the theft. I'd spent the last 3 years building something of my own. Now I was right back in the house where it all started, staring at a paper trail of betrayal pinned to a freezer door. That night, after Grandma fell asleep in the recliner, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, too stunned to cry. The posters were gone, the curtains faded, but the memories remained some sweet, most complicated. I didn't know what to do yet. I only knew I wasn't going to let this go. They thought I'd stay quiet. Like always. They thought I'd take the hit, keep the peace, swallow the shame. But something about seeing Grandma with that sandwich, in that cold kitchen, I flipped a switch in me. This wasn't about pride. This was about decency. And the first thing I was going to do in the morning was check that bank account myself. Then I'd decide how far I was willing to go to make things right. At exactly 7:43 a.m., I sat cross-legged on the floor of the den with my laptop open, my coffee cold and untouched on the side table. The same bank interface I'd used for years greeted me with polite indifference. The numbers in my savings account so much smaller than I remembered that I actually blinked twice, thinking there was a glitch. But there wasn't. The $17, 532, I had built over years of disciplined saving, now read $2. 76. The transaction history was even worse. Over the last 8 months, there had been a slow bleed, 200 here, 350 there. Round numbers that didn't trigger automatic alerts. But it wasn't until 2 weeks ago that the largest withdrawal was made, exactly $7. 200, transferred directly to a travel booking service. The memo line read Tobias AZ Wellness Retreat. The remaining amounts had gone toward what appeared to be boutique clothing stores, PayPal transfers to my mother's email, and recurring charges for something labeled Essential Freedom Academy, which turned out to be a glorified online life coaching service Tobias had signed up for and dropped out of within a week. That was what my future had been traded for. A desert vacation, a half-baked healing journey, and a stack of overpriced hoodies. I took a screenshot of every transaction and saved it to a folder named Accountability. My fingers hovered over my phone, debating whether to call my mom directly. But the rage hadn't yet settled into language. Instead, I opened my email and composed a message to Dr. Rachel Sloan, my best friend from college, now an attorney in Austin. I didn't ask for advice. I stated the facts. She replied within 10 minutes. Her response was short and surgical. This is financial abuse. Keep collecting proof. Don't confront until you're ready to act. I'm here. It was exactly the tone I needed. Calm, clear, professional. It helped me recenter. Back in the kitchen, Grandma June was awake, sitting silently at the window with a throw blanket around her shoulders and a crossword puzzle untouched on the table. I asked her gently if she'd had breakfast. She shook her head. When I checked the pantry, it was mostly canned soup and outdated rice. I cooked scrambled eggs, poured her orange juice, and made sure she took her morning meds, or tried to. Half of her pill bottles were empty. One was missing entirely, and the others were weeks overdue. They said they'd pick them up yesterday before the flight. She mumbled. But Victor forgot his phone charger and got distracted. I didn't comment. I just made a note to call the pharmacy and refill everything myself. Later, I'd discover they hadn't been refilled in over a month. By noon, I'd called the utilities company to prevent a shut-off notice, cleaned out the spoiled food in the fridge, and made an appointment with Grandma's primary physician. I also found a stack of final notices tucked behind the microwave, most of them unopened. Medical bills, property tax warnings, a reminder from the city that the back fence needed urgent repair or the house would be cited. The image of my mother posting poolside selfies with desert hashtags just 3 hours after this paper trail of decay settled like concrete in my gut. I knew I couldn't stay passive, but the problem was deeper than missing money. What broke me most was realizing just how disposable I had become to the people who raised me. Not a daughter, not a partner in care, just an asset, a funding source, a temporary babysitter for a grandmother they could no longer be bothered to feed. They left a note like it was nothing. Not even a call. Not even a please. That night, I put Grandma to bed after helping her brush her teeth and warming a heating pad for her knees. She thanked me 3 times. Her voice étonnante, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to ask for comfort anymore. I slept on the couch, fully clothed, with my phone on my chest and a legal pad filled with plans beside me. Tomorrow, I'd start calling Adult Protective Services. Tomorrow, I'd dig deeper into account access, medical neglect, and how long this pattern had been running under my nose. But for now, I just stared at the ceiling fan, slowly turning above me, thinking about the version of myself I used to be when I lived in this house. Quiet, obedient, always trying to earn my mother's approval, never questioning where the goalposts went when they moved every few months. But that girl was gone. This time, I wasn't here to be manipulated or guilted into silence. This time, I came home not just as a daughter, but as someone with a license, legal standing, and nothing left to lose. I didn't come back to start a fight, but they picked one anyway when they stole from me. The next morning started with a call to Crescent Pharmacy. I explained that I was June Spencer's granddaughter, visiting for the holidays, and was concerned she hadn't received her refills. The technician on the line paused, then said gently, "Ma'am, we've been holding her prescriptions for over 3 weeks. Last time, your mother said they'd pick them up by Tuesday." I thanked her, hung up, and added that to the list. I called the clinic next. They hadn't seen Grandma since midsummer. No follow-ups, no labs, no adjusted doses, despite her increased stiffness and confusion. It was clear to me that this was not forgetfulness. It was abandonment, dressed up as delegation. And I was no longer in the mood to be polite about it. After dropping by the pharmacy to pick up every overdue prescription in her name, I returned to the house and decided it was time to see how deep this rabbit hole really went. I walked into Tobias's room, the one he used when visiting, which, according to Grandma, had lately become more of a storage unit for his latest obsessions. The moment I opened the door, the scent hit me: weed, body spray, and something faintly sour, like old beer and fast food. His laptop sat open on the desk. The wallpaper a quote that read, "The grind never stops," next to a photo of him holding a vape pen like a trophy. I checked the drawers, expecting clutter, but not expecting this level of chaos. Designer shoes with tags still attached, limited edition gaming consoles, and boxes of nutritional supplements I knew he wasn't using. Stashed in a shoebox behind a stack of hoodies were several empty pill bottles, their labels scratched off, and next to them, a small scale and a Ziploc bag with white residue. That was when the pieces started locking into place. The wellness retreat in Arizona wasn't just a vacation, it was likely a cover. Tobias wasn't recovering. He was running. Or worse, being enabled to run, and they were using my money to fund it. I backed out of the room and shut the door without touching anything else. My heart was beating faster than I wanted to admit. Not from fear, but from the quiet clarity that comes when denial evaporates. I had known, deep down, that Tobias was troubled, but I hadn't realized how far things had gone. I called Mrs. Fan, the neighbor across the street, who'd lived there for 40 years, and who knew more about my family's patterns than anyone should. She didn't sound surprised when I asked if she'd noticed anything recently. "He had a party here 3 nights ago," she said, without hesitation. "Loud. 15, maybe 20 kids. Your grandma didn't come out once. I thought you were here. Actually, your mom said you were flying in that weekend." I didn't correct her. I just thanked her and hung up. That call alone told me everything I needed to know about how casually the lies were handed out in this house. By the time I sat back down in the living room, the sun was starting to set, and the shadows stretched long across the floor. Grandma was asleep in her recliner again, curled up in a blanket I remembered from childhood. I looked at her fragile frame, the soft rise and fall of her chest, and I felt a new kind of rage settle into my bones. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. My mother had lied to me, drained my savings, neglected her own mother, and enabled Tobias's addiction, all while uploading filtered photos of desert hikes and wine tastings. Victor, as always, was the accessory, the excuse factory, the backup singer to her solo act. I pulled out my legal pad and started organizing facts. The joint account history. The pharmacy records. The physical condition of the house. Tobias's room. And the substances I'd found. I wasn't a lawyer, but I had enough common sense to know when something crossed a line. My next call was to Rachel. This time, I didn't wait for permission. I told her everything. She listened without interruption. Then said calmly, "You need to act fast. If your mom suspects you're building a case, she'll spin it before you can prove anything. Keep documenting. Get power of attorney for your grandmother. And for the love of God, do not let them back in that house without you present." That night, I emailed the family lawyer who handled my late grandfather's estate. I requested a consultation. I also left a voicemail with Adult Protective Services, stating that I suspected medical and financial neglect of a vulnerable senior. I didn't use my mom's name yet. I wanted the facts in place first. The last thing I needed was her flipping the narrative before I could hold it up to light. I knew how she worked. Performative victimhood was her sport, and Tobias was her medal. I wouldn't win by playing louder. I had to be smarter, sharper. I had to build something undeniable. As I turned off the lights that night, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The same face I'd seen for years. But something had shifted. I wasn't just visiting anymore. I was staying. Until this was over. Until this house stopped smelling like broken promises and stale resentment. Until Grandma was safe. Until the truth had no room left to hide. By the time Thursday rolled around, I had everything printed, labeled, and filed. I made 3 copies of the documentation, one to keep with me, one for Rachel, and one in a fireproof box I stored in Grandma's linen closet, under the extra towels. It wasn't just about preparation. It was about control. After years of feeling like a background character in my own family's mess, I needed to remind myself that I was capable of structure, of taking steps that led to change. Not just survival. While Grandma napped, I drove downtown to the elder law firm where our family attorney, Mr. Carter, still worked in a reduced role. He remembered me instantly. "Tila," he said, shaking my hand with quiet warmth. "You look just like your grandfather when you're focused." That man could organize a barn raising with a clipboard and 3 sentences. I showed him the note, then the account records, then the prescriptions. His eyes sharpened with every new page I laid down. "They've left a trail," he said. "A sloppy one. But it's enough." He helped me draft a temporary power of attorney form, pending a full capacity evaluation for Grandma, which we scheduled with her doctor for the next Monday. He also advised that I immediately lock access to any joint accounts where my name appeared. I hadn't even thought of that. When I called the bank, I discovered that my mom had listed herself as a cosigner on a secondary account under my name, one I didn't even remember creating. The balance had been drained months ago. That night, I cooked a full meal for Grandma: baked salmon, mashed sweet potatoes, and steamed green beans. She ate slowly, but with visible gratitude, complimenting the flavor and asking softly if I could write the recipe down for her. I told her, of course. I didn't tell her it was from a meal kit I picked up that afternoon because the fridge was still mostly empty. I helped her get ready for bed, made sure her evening meds were sorted into the pill organizer, and sat with her until she fell asleep. Then I pulled out my phone and opened social media. There they were, my mother and Victor, drinking sangria on a rooftop bar in Phoenix. The red desert behind them, glowing with sunset. Her caption read, "Finally, taking time for us. No guilt. No drama. Just peace. Number, healing deserved number, family first." The irony made me feel nauseous. They had taken everything from me, neglected a woman who raised them, and abandoned a teenager in crisis to chase aesthetic self-care, and still, somehow, they thought they were the victims of someone else's chaos. I scrolled through their feed, looking for clues. That's when I found a story tag that made my jaw clench. A boomerang clip from Tobias, filmed from what looked like a fancy resort bathroom. Shirtless, vaping, wearing a silver chain I knew cost at least $200. He had captioned it, "Energy cleanse loading. Stay tuned." I stared at it for a long time. There was no apology, no regret, not even awareness. It wasn't just the money. It was the delusion, the entitlement. The way they had made him the sun, and the rest of us, the planets forced to orbit his needs. I closed the app, called Rachel, told her we needed to move faster. The next day, Rachel connected me with a local social worker who specialized in elder advocacy. Her name was Geneva, and within 5 minutes of walking into our home, she could see what I had been documenting. The fridge, the medications, the unpaid bills, the clear signs of abandonment. Geneva sat with Grandma for nearly an hour, gently asking her questions about her care, her routines, and how often my mother and Victor had been visiting. Grandma answered honestly, without embellishment. There were long pauses. There were moments where she hesitated, clearly not wanting to get anyone in trouble. But the truth slipped through anyway. Geneva took notes on a worn yellow legal pad and promised me that she would be filing a formal report within 24 hours. Later that evening, Victor called. His name lit up on my phone like a warning flare. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that started with a forced chuckle and ended with veiled condescension. "Hey, Tiela. Your mom's a little confused about why her bank login isn't working. Says she can't access the usual savings account. Could you take a look at that also? Tobias is doing great out here. Real progress. I think the break's been good for everyone. Anyway, call us when you get a sec." I didn't call him back. I wasn't confused. I was done, pretending I was. The next morning, Grandma was already dressed when I came downstairs. She'd put on a soft blue sweater and brushed her hair back, held with two barrettes I hadn't seen in years. There was a quiet clarity in her face. Not kite defiance, but something close to readiness. She had agreed, after some coaxing, to go with me to her doctor's office for a full cognitive and medical evaluation. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want conflict. But when I told her gently that this would allow her to make decisions without interference, something in her softened. "I trust you, baby," she'd whispered. And I hadn't let myself cry until she turned away to tie her shoes. At the clinic, Dr. Levine confirmed what I already suspected. Early cognitive fatigue, mild memory impairment, but no evidence of dementia or incompetence. "She's tired," he said after the exam, "and isolated. But she knows what she wants, and she's capable of saying it." I nodded and signed the papers. Within the hour, we filed the notarized, durable power of attorney and healthcare proxy, placing all major decisions legally in my hands. My mother could scream about it later. By that point, it would already be done. That afternoon, I found an envelope taped to the front door. No postage, no handwriting, just my name scrawled in black Sharpie on the outside. Inside was a folded piece of paper. I recognized the formatting immediately. It was a printout from the shared Dropbox folder my mother and I had used years ago to coordinate Grandma's care schedule. Only this page had been altered. At the bottom, someone had typed, "If you want to start playing legal games, don't be surprised if people stop playing nice. Consider that before you go too far." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. It was her, the passive-aggressive tone, the implication of threats dressed as warnings, and the refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing textbook Elise. I didn't show the note to Grandma. There was no point. Instead, I took a photo, sent it to Rachel, and added it to the evidence file. Rachel called me 5 minutes later and said, without preamble, "She's trying to intimidate you. Don't respond. Every time she overreaches, it strengthens our case." The next move came that evening. Just before dinner. When Tobias called me, his number had changed. Probably one of those temporary burner apps he used when bouncing from place to place. His voice was thick, groggy, and just a little too relaxed to be natural. "Hey," he said, stretching the word like it owed him rent. "Mom says you're making a huge deal out of nothing. It was just some money. We'll pay you back when the trust fund clears." I didn't interrupt. I just let him talk. He went on for 5 straight minutes, weaving excuses with half-truths and the occasional veiled insult. When he finally paused, I asked one question. "Where are you right now?" There was a beat of silence. Then some fumbling. "Somewhere outside Sedona," he said. "It's a private facility. Clean air. Chakra realignment." You wouldn't get it. I closed my eyes. This wasn't recovery. This was escape with room service. "You're not well, Tobias," I said calmly. "And I'm not the villain in your story. I'm the person who's trying to make sure the woman who raised us doesn't end up hospitalized because everyone else decided she was optional." He didn't respond right away, just breathed heavily into the line. Then muttered something about family politics before hanging up. I put the phone down and sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the window. Outside, the wind had picked up, and dry leaves skittered across the driveway like they were trying to outrun winter. I thought about all the years I'd spent minimizing Elise's behavior, convincing myself that she wasn't malicious, just self-centered, just overwhelmed, just doing her best. But none of those excuses accounted for the note on the fridge, or the missing pills, or the way Grandma flinched when she heard sudden noises. You don't forget to love someone. You choose to stop showing up. Later that night, while Grandma watched an old Western rerun with her feet tucked under a blanket, I sat on the floor with a legal pad and sketched out the timeline, the transfers, the social media posts, the voicemails, the threats. Rachel was right. This wasn't just dysfunction. This was a pattern of exploitation. And for the first time in my life, I was done playing nice about it. No more bargaining. No more second chances. They had taken my savings. They had risked Grandma's life. And now they were trying to gaslight me into silence. But this time, I wasn't walking away. This time, I was writing everything down. It was around 10:15 p.m. when the call came from the hospital. A nurse from the ER introduced herself in a calm but clipped voice and asked if I was related to a Tobias Spencer. My stomach sank as she explained that he had been brought in unconscious by hotel staff in Sedona after being found unresponsive in a poolside cabana. The toxicology screen wasn't final yet, but the admitting physician suspected a polysubstance overdose involving opioids, benzodiazepines, and alcohol. They'd administered naloxone twice. He had a pulse but had been intubated for airway protection. I didn't speak for a few seconds. I just stared at the wall, the quiet hum of the refrigerator behind me, suddenly the loudest sound in the house. The nurse said they needed someone on file as next of kin. I gave my name and credentials and asked them to text me the attending's contact information. When I hung up, I sat in the dark for nearly half an hour without moving. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't even feel surprised. Somewhere inside me, I had known this was coming. The timing, the place, the trigger might have changed, but the trajectory had always been the same. It was never going to be a peaceful retreat. It was always going to end in an emergency room. I called Rachel, updated her, and told her what I was planning to do next. Then I opened my laptop and started writing the summary the hospital would eventually need. Known history of addiction, prior behavioral issues, access to controlled substances, enabling environment, financial exploitation of multiple family members, pending legal action. The words didn't feel harsh. They felt necessary. I wasn't doing this to hurt anyone. I was doing it to document what everyone else kept pretending wasn't real. The next morning, before the sun even rose, I drove Grandma to her appointment for her updated Medicare evaluation and requested a formal capacity letter from her doctor stating that she was mentally competent but physically reliant. I filed that with the legal office and then placed a call to Geneva, the social worker. I told her everything. She took a breath, then said, "It's time to escalate." That afternoon, Officer Martinez from the Elder Protection Division came by to document the house. He was polite, but meticulous. He took photos of the empty fridge, the expired medications, the stack of unpaid bills, and the list of missed appointments. He took my written statement and asked for my signed consent to include the voicemail recordings and bank screenshots. When he asked if I believed my mother would retaliate once she returned, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. I said she would deny everything, redirect blame, accuse me of overstepping, and claim she was misunderstood. I said she would weaponize guilt and grief until there was nothing left standing but the story she had already rehearsed. The officer didn't comment. He just nodded slowly and kept writing. By evening, I received confirmation from the hospital in Sedona that Tobias had stabilized and was breathing on his own. Still confused, still weak, but out of immediate danger. I called the unit and asked to speak to the social worker. When she picked up, I asked if the patient had insurance on file. She said no. I said I would be covering it under my family emergency benefits. There was silence on the line before she replied, "Thank you. He's lucky to have you." I didn't respond. I didn't feel like saying that luck had nothing to do with it. When I got back to the house, Grandma was sitting by the fireplace with a mug of tea, her eyes heavy, but her mind alert. She asked how Tobias was doing. I told her the truth. She nodded slowly and said, "I wish they'd listened sooner." I knew what she meant. Elise had always brushed things off, always insisted Tobias just needed space. Time. Another program. Another restart. But what he needed was boundaries, consequences, support that didn't involve blind loyalty. And what none of us ever got was the right to say no without being labeled cruel. That night, I drafted the final version of the document that would strip Elise and Victor of any remaining access to Grandma's finances or medical authority. I attached every legal reference Rachel had provided. I printed 5 copies, signed them in ink, and sealed them in individual envelopes. I wasn't waiting for their approval. I was making mine, and mine began with ending the story before it swallowed us all. They landed on a Sunday evening, just after sunset, like nothing had happened. Elise texted me from the airport, casually asking if I needed anything from the duty-free shop. I didn't answer. 30 minutes later, I heard the car door slam and Victor's laugh echoing in the driveway as they dragged their matching wheeled luggage up the front steps like royalty returning from exile. I stood by the kitchen window, arms crossed, watching them fumble with the key I'd already replaced 2 days prior. When the lock didn't click, Elise knocked once, then rang the bell twice. I waited a few seconds before opening the door. She smiled like we were old friends meeting for brunch. "Oh, you changed the locks. That's new," she said, not even trying to hide the passive-aggressive tone. Victor stood behind her, expression neutrale, but eyes twitching like someone who already sensed this wouldn't go the way he wanted. I didn't smile back. "You're not welcome in this house right now," I said calmly. "We need to talk somewhere neutral. Not here." Elise scoffed. "Excuse me, I'm her daughter. This is my family's home." I met her gaze without blinking. "No, this is Grandma's home. And until you explain how $17,000 disappeared under your watch, I suggest you find a hotel." She started to raise her voice, but stopped when she noticed Geneva standing just inside the hall, clipboard in hand. Calmly observing the interaction, Elise's face shifted, just slightly, enough to betray recognition that this wasn't just about family anymore. Geneva stepped forward. "Mrs. Spencer, I'm a mandated reporter with Adult Protective Services. We've opened a file. At this stage, we recommend all parties avoid unaccompanied contact with the client until the investigation concludes. Elise didn't respond. She just stared at me, the performance mask cracking. Unbelievable, she muttered. You really called the government on your own mother? I nodded once. Yes. After you stole from me. After you neglected her. After Tobias nearly died. Victor cleared his throat, trying to shift the tension. We should talk privately. This is all getting a little out of hand. But it wasn't out of hand. It was finally in hand. For the first time in years, I handed them a sealed envelope with the updated legal documents and said, "These papers revoke your access to all medical acts, financial, and property-related decisions. They've been filed and notarized. You are no longer listed as emergency contacts. If you want to contest anything, speak to our attorney. Until then, do not attempt to enter this house." Elise didn't take the envelope. She just looked at me like she didn't recognize the person standing in front of her. And maybe she didn't. Maybe she expected me to stay the same compliant version of myself that kept the peace, swallowed the hurt, and made room for other people's chaos. But that girl was gone. This version wasn't fueled by resentment. It was clarity. Calm, cold clarity, born of watching someone you love almost disappear while others posted spa selfies, like it was nothing. They left without further comment. No fight. No tears. Just silence thick enough to slice through. That night, I sat with Grandma by the fire. I told her what had happened, and watched the flicker of relief move across her face. She didn't say much, just reached out for my hand and squeezed it gently, like she finally believed someone was going to stay this time. Later, after she went to bed, I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the quiet house. For the first time in weeks, it actually felt like home. No manipulation, no gaslighting, just breath and stillness and consequence. The next morning, Tobias called. His voice was hoarse, but lucid. He said he remembered parts of what happened. He said the nurse told him I had covered his bills. He asked why. I told him the truth. Because I didn't want you to die. That doesn't mean I'm going to let you keep destroying everyone around you. He was quiet. Then he asked if he could come home. I said no. Not until he agreed to go into an actual recovery program. One with structure. One that didn't involve healing crystals and gourmet breakfasts. He sighed. Then asked, "What if I mess up again?" I didn't lecture. I just said, "Then you get up and try again. But you don't get to take us down with you anymore." That afternoon, I emailed Rachel one final update. The confrontation had happened. The locks were changed. The lines had been drawn. Now it was time to rebuild. Not from resentment, but from a new kind of boundary. One rooted in earned trust, not guilt. We weren't healed. We weren't whole. But we were awake. And that was the beginning of everything. The next few weeks passed in small, quiet victories. The kind that don't make headlines but change everything underneath. I set up a weekly delivery for groceries and medication so Grandma wouldn't have to worry about driving again. Geneva helped me apply for in-home caregiver hours, which gave us someone to assist during the day so I could take calls and start consulting part-time again. I turned the guest bedroom into a small home office. Nothing fancy, just a sturdy desk, a confortable chair, and a place where my thoughts didn't have to compete with anyone else's noise. I felt something unfamiliar creeping back into my life. Peace. Not perfection. Not closure. Just room to breathe without being blamed for it. Elise tried to reach out twice. The first time, it was an email filled with excuses wrapped in guilt. How hard it had been raising two kids with no support. How misunderstood she felt. How unfair it was that I had turned the entire family against her. I didn't respond. The second message came through Rachel, a formal notice that they intended to petition for reinstatement of financial rights, citing emotional manipulation and undue influence. Rachel laughed when she read it aloud. They really think you pulled off a psychological coup in 6 weeks. I didn't laugh. I just said, let them try. The receipts are ready. Victor, true to form, stayed in the background. From what I gathered, he had gone back to consulting part-time and was focusing on optics, posting photos of himself volunteering, writing posts about second chances and healing. It didn't bother me. I had stopped measuring truth based on how good someone's story sounded online. The only person I kept tabs on was Tobias. He called twice a week, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to rant, sometimes just to listen to someone, not waiting for him to fail again. I never sugarcoated things. When he tried to make jokes about the overdose, I shut it down. When he asked what Grandma thought, I told him she prayed for him every night, but didn't want to see him until he was sober for at least 90 days. He said he understood. I hoped he actually did. One afternoon, while sorting through the mail, I found a letter tucked between bills and coupons. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with shaky handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was from my Uncle Warren, Elise's older brother who had cut ties with the family nearly a decade ago after a falling out. I was too young to fully understand at the time. The note was brief. He had heard what happened. He said I did the right thing. And that if I ever needed help navigating the backlash, I wasn't alone. That sentence stayed with me. Not because I needed rescuing, but because for the first time, I realized there were people in our orbit who had also walked away quietly, choosing sanity over loyalty. People who had been burned by the same fire but never got the chance to speak about the smoke. Grandma's strength returned slowly. She started reading again, finishing entire mystery novels in 3 days, like she used to when I was little. She joined a virtual book club, insisted I stop hovering, and even asked me to teach her how to use Zoom properly so she could see some faces that aren't mine and yours. I took that as a good sign. One night, as we sat watching a rerun of a 90-second cooking show, she turned to me and said, "You know, for years I thought keeping the peace meant letting things slide. But peace without truth isn't peace. It's paralysis." I didn't say anything. I just reached for her hand. By the time March rolled around, the investigation was formally closed. The findings stated clear evidence of financial negligence, intentional deception regarding care responsibilities, and misuse of shared assets. APS wouldn't press charges unless we pursued civil litigation, which I chose not to for now. The goal had never been punishment. It had been protection, and we had it now. That was enough. I drove to the lake house once, just to see it. It had sat empty for months. Shutters closed. Lawn, overgrown. The energy of a place abandoned, not out of necessity, but shame. I didn't go inside. Just stood on the porch for a while, remembering all the summers we'd spent there as kids, chasing dragonflies and waiting for Grandma's sun tea to steep on the windowsill. That house used to be filled with laughter. Now it was quiet. I didn't want it back. I just wanted the version of us that used to feel safe there. But maybe that version never really existed. Maybe we were always pretending. And now, finally, we weren't pretending anymore. Spring settled in slowly that year. The kind that didn't arrive with bright blossoms or dramatic sunrises, but with quiet mornings, soft winds, and the return of routine. Grandma's calendar was filled again, not with doctor's appointments or medication refills, but with things that actually made her smile. Her weekly calls with her old church group had resumed. She even asked me to drive her to a quilting meetup one Saturday, where she reconnected with 2 women she hadn't seen since 2015. I watched from the parking lot as she walked into that community hall like she had never left it. No hesitation. No fear. Just the quiet grace of someone reclaiming a part of themselves they didn't know had been stolen. One evening, in mid-April, Rachel forwarded me a notice from the county clerk's office. Elise and Victor had withdrawn their petition. No explanation, no apology, just an official statement of withdrawal, signed and time-stamped. Maybe their lawyer had finally told them the truth. Maybe they realized how bad it would look if everything went public. Or maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand that no matter how loud they got, the story had changed. The narrative wasn't in their control anymore. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post. I didn't even call Rachel right away. I just printed the document and slid it into the final tab of the binder. I kept on my desk labeled simply, proof. A few days later, Tobias called, this time from a sober living facility upstate. He said he'd enrolled voluntarily, was attending group every morning, and working a landscaping job in the afternoons. He didn't ask for money, didn't ask to come home, just said he was trying. He said he thought about Grandma every night and hoped that one day she'd let him visit. I didn't promise anything, but I told him to keep going. I could hear it in his voice. He wasn't fixed, but he wasn't faking either. And after everything, that meant something. By May, I had taken on a small consulting project for a nonprofit in Portland, working remotely and building campaigns focused on caregiver advocacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I was buried in unpaid bills and legal paperwork. Now, I was using what I learned to help others navigate the same storm. Every time I opened a new client file, I saw a version of myself in the margins, someone trying to survive without a blueprint, someone who had loved deeply and been left holding the consequences. Grandma surprised me that same month by announcing she wanted to update her will. She said it calmly, over breakfast, between sips of Earl Grey and bites of banana bread. Not because I'm going anywhere, she added, but because I want things in order while I still have full say. I nodded and told her I'd schedule the appointment. When we sat down with Mr. Carter 2 weeks later, she named me executor and primary beneficiary. There was no drama, no big reveal. Just her soft, steady voice, outlining her wishes with the clarity of someone who had seen what silence could cost. When we left the office, she squeezed my arm and said, "Not because you're my favorite, but because you showed up." I don't know if there's a single moment where healing becomes official. There's no ceremony, no ribunkat, no certificate of completion. But I remember a Sunday morning in June when I stood in the backyard planting lavender with Grandma, and her hands in gloves, her sun hat tilted just slightly to the side. And I realized we hadn't mentioned Elise in over 2 weeks. Not out of avoidance. Just because the air no longer belonged to her. It belonged to us. And in that small silence, I felt something settle. Elise hadn't tried to come back. Not in person. Not by phone. Victor had faded entirely, absorbed back into whatever LinkedIn version of redemption he'd chosen for himself. Tobias was still at the facility. Now, almost 60 days in. His last call was shorter, but clearer. He said he'd written Grandma a letter and didn't expect a reply. He just wanted her to have it. I told him I'd make sure she did. That evening, I placed the envelope on her nightstand without opening it. She didn't read it right away. She just looked at it, nodded slowly, and said, "Maybe tomorrow." And that was enough. Summer came quietly, the way it does when you've stopped chasing time and started honoring rhythm. The lavender bloomed by late June, and Grandma insisted we dry bundles for the pantry like she used to when I was little. She'd moved more slowly now, but there was a steadiness in her steps, a kind of reclaimed dignity that no one could strip from her again. The house felt different. Not because the furniture had changed or the light hit the walls any softer and increased, but because it finally felt like it belonged to us uncontested, unmanipulated, and no longer held hostage by anyone else's chaos. One morning, I stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee, when I noticed the envelope was gone from Grandma's nightstand. She hadn't said anything. I hadn't mentioned reading it. But when she came into the kitchen later, with her cardigan wrapped around her shoulders. I saw her eyes were softer. "He's still my grandson," she said quietly, as if continuing a conversation we hadn't started out loud. "But I don't owe him me peace." I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about setting yourself free from needing their apology to move forward. I'd started sleeping better. No nightmares. No early morning jolts of panic. The silence in the house was no longer eerie, it was earned. I found myself laughing more often. Not the polite kind, but the sudden, unguarded laughter that surprises you mid-sentence. I didn't realize how much space fear had taken up until it wasn't there anymore. Not fear of violence or catastrophe, but of disruption, the emotional tremors that come when someone walks in the door and brings every old wound with them. That fear was gone, and what remained was mine. On Grandma's birthday, we hosted a small lunch, just 6 people. The neighbor across the street, her friend from the quilting club, a retired schoolteacher she'd known since 1983, and a woman from church who'd recently lost her husband. I cooked a simple meal and watched as they shared stories that stretched back decades, not a single one of them requiring performance or approval. At one point, I looked at Grandma and thought, this is what legacy looks like. Not in what you leave behind when you're gone, but what you create while you're still here. A space where people feel seen. Elise never wrote back, never called, never asked to meet. Whether out of shame or stubbornness, I don't know. But I stopped needing the why. Victor disappeared entirely from our world. Reduced to a digital presence I no longer tracked. Tobias completed his program, moved into sober housing, and started working at a nursery on the outskirts of town. He wrote Grandma again. This time, she read the letter aloud. It was simple, sincere. No big promises, just accountability. She didn't cry. Just folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer with her crossword puzzles. I want to see him one day, she said, but not until I believe he wants to see me for the right reasons. By the end of August, I had accepted a full-time contract with the nonprofit. I worked from home, kept the mornings free for Grandma's doctor visits and afternoon walks, and began mentoring young women navigating caregiving roles for aging parents. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and it mattered. There's something powerful about rebuilding your life in the quiet. When no one's watching, when no one expects applause, it anchors you, gives you weight. The kind that can't be shaken by drama or family politics. Sometimes, late at night, I'd replay that first moment. The one that started it all. Flying home for the holidays. Expecting noise, tradition, maybe even tension, but not the stillness of a dark house and a single sandwich left on the table. That moment used to feel like a warning. Now it feels like a turning point. A pivot. The second everything broke open just enough to let truth slip in. I don't know if stories like ours ever truly end. They settle. They evolve. They quiet down. But they leave shadows. And sometimes those shadows remind you that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through hard choices and quiet mornings, and the steady decision to stay, rebuild, and protect what matters. So if you've ever walked back into a house that felt unfamiliar, if you've ever had to choose truth over loyalty, or found yourself building peace in the aftermath of betrayal, ask yourself this. What would you do if the people who raised you forgot how to love you, but expected you to save them anyway?